Good morning, everyone. My name is Arpan Banerjee. I am a doctoral fellow at the Department of East Asian Studies, University of Delhi, and academic counselor at IGNOU. And welcome to my learning session. So, I'm going to teach you the paper, Administrative System at the Union Level, the code of which is BPAC 133. So, let us begin with this paper, that is Administrative System at the Union Level. So, let us first see the syllabus of this paper, BPSC 133. So the first block that we are going to do in this paper, it is regarding evolution of Indian administration. So in this first block that we are going to start today only, related to the evolution of Indian administration, we are going to have 4 units in this first block. The first unit would be ancient administrative system. The second unit is related to medieval administrative system, and the third unit is related to the British administrative system. Finally, we'll be doing continuity and change in Indian administration post 1947, which means post independence of India. So 4 units we are going to do in this first block, beginning with the ancient administration, then medieval, then the British administrative system, and then continuity and change after 1947. The second block that we have is parliamentary democracy in India. Now here we have 4 units. The first one is Indian federalism. We're going to study the federal structure in our country. In the second part, in the second unit, we're going to study about the legislature in our country, the parliament, including the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, and also the state legislatures as well. The third unit is related to the executive, and finally, the fourth part, the fourth unit of this second block is related to judiciary. Now, in block 3, we are going to do the institutional framework of administration at union level. In this, we have 4 units. Unit 6 is related to Cabinet Secretariat. Unit 7 is related to the Central Secretariat. Unit 8 is related to All India and Central Services. And the final unit, that is Unit 9, is related to Administrative Tribunals. Block 4, in the block 4, we are going to do commissions. Here also, the Unit 10 is related to commissions in India, general introduction. Unit 10A is related to the National Institute for Transforming India, the Niti Aayog. Unit 10B is related to the UPSC. Unit 10C is related to the Election Commission. Unit 10D is related to the Finance Commission. Unit 10E is related to the Central Vigilance Commission. And the final unit of Block 4, that is Unit 10F, is related to Administrative Reforms Commission. Now coming to the concept and role of civil society. Here we have Unit 11, that is concept and role of civil society. So this is just one unit here. And the final block that we have is Block 6, related to regulatory commissions. So in the regulatory commissions, we are going to have, we are going to do about the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, the TRAI. We are going to do about, we're going to read about the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority. And finally, we are going to read about the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. So these 3 would be the regulatory commissions that we are going to study about. And this is the final unit of this paper, Block 6. But today we are going to start with the Unit 1, that is related to ancient administrative system. After that, we are going to discuss medieval and British administrative system. So let us begin. Now, before beginning with the first unit, let me just give you a brief introduction of this paper, BPAC 133, that is administrative system at the union level. Now, this paper, it deals with administrative system at the union level, as the name itself suggests. And as I just told you, that it has a total number of 6 blocks. So this paper, it deals with the evolution of the administrative system since ancient times, and it takes in the continuous changing character of the Indian administration in post-independence era. And we also will discuss in this paper various facets of Indian federalism, legislature, executive, and judiciary that form a part of parliamentary democracy in India. And we are also going to deal with the institutional framework, wherein we are going to study about the cabinet secretariat, the central secretariat, the all India and central services, the administrative tribunals, and the commissions like Niti Aayog, UPSC, SSC, Election Commission, Finance Commission, Central Vigilance Commission, and also the regulatory agencies as well. So, and also finally, this course covers topics on civil society as well as administrative reforms. So let us begin with the first unit, that is ancient administrative system. So in this unit, ancient administrative system, we're going to study how administration was in India during the ancient era, and we're going to focus mainly on the Mauryan Empire as well as the Gupta Empire. So these two empires we're going to focus on, and how administration was there. So we all know that Indian administration, if we trace its evolution, we can trace it back 5,000 years ago at least, to the Indus Valley civilization. And in the Indus Valley civilization, whatever evidences we've got, we know that the king was all powerful, and everything in the kingdom was carried out in his name. The king was assisted by a council of ministers, and there were other functionaries and officers as well in that kingdom, in the administrative apparatus of that kingdom. So in ancient times, the powers of administrating the kingdom was centralized. So there was a lot of centralization, and the institution of king was at the head of the administrative apparatus. So after this came the Vedic period. The early Vedic Aryans, they were organized into tribes rather than kingdoms. And the chief of a tribe was called Rajan. The main responsibility of the Rajan was to protect the tribe. And the Rajan was aided by several functionaries as well, including the Purohit, the Senani or the army chief, the Dutas or the envoys, and the Spash or the spies. So this was during the Vedic period. Now let's moving on. We are going to discuss the Mauryan administrative system. So as I told you, in ancient administrative system, we are going to discuss about the Mauryas and the Guptas. So Indian history, as we all know, it entered into a new era with the beginning of the Mauryan Empire. And under the Mauryan Empire, India for the first time attained both at the political as well as the administrative level. It entered a new era, India, under the Mauryan Empire. And the Mauryan Empire was divided into 4 provinces with Patliputra as the capital. The other 4 provincial capitals were Tosali in the east, Ujjain in the west, Suvarnagiri in the south, and Takshila in the north. So the Mauryans, they developed an organized and elaborate system of administration, as we are going to see in this paper, that they developed under the 3 prominent kings, Chandragupta Maurya, Bindusar, and Ashoka. The Mauryans, they developed an organized and elaborate system of administration. And there was, of course, the administration was centralized directly under the king. So central administration was definitely there, directly under the king. However, besides the central administration, there was provincial administration as well, local administration, revenue administration, judicial as well as military administration. So we're going to focus on all these aspects. So we're going to focus on the provincial administration, the local administration, period. So as we have studied while we were doing Kautilya as well, the central administration, in the central administration, the king was the supreme and sovereign authority in the Mauryan administration. The king had supreme executive, legislative, and judicial powers vested in him. So the king was the supreme and sovereign authority during the Mauryan period, and all the executive, legislative, and judicial powers were vested in the king only. And the king himself was responsible for the safety and security of his kingdom. And it was the king only who laid down the general lines of policy that was to be followed by all the officials. And it was the king only who appointed the ministers as well as the other officers of the royal administration. So everything was centralized around the king. In addition, the king was the supreme commander of the army as well. And the king was also the head of the entire military. So in today's India, in post-independent India, we have the President of India, who is the supreme commander of the armed forces. However, during the Mauryan time, the king was the supreme commander, and everything, literally everything, was under the king's supervision, from administration to executive, judiciary, to appointing ministers and officials, to deciding the policy. Everything was being done by the king. So moving on, we see that the Mauryan Empire before Ashoka was essentially a Hindu state. So it was Ashoka who started then adopting, synthesizing certain elements of Buddhism also along with Hinduism. So the Mauryan Empire before Ashoka was essentially a Hindu state, and according to the Hindu concept, the supreme sovereign of the state was dharma or law, and the king was the guardian of dharma. So the supreme sovereign of the state was dharma, and the king was the guardian of dharma. So that is why the king could never dare to define the laws, because the king himself was the guardian of the dharma or the law. So the king could never dare to defy the laws. The king was aided and advised by a Mantri Parishad or council of ministers, and the king was to be guided by the Mantri Parishad in conduct of day-to-day administration. So this became more of an obligation during the times of emergencies like natural disaster or epidemics. So upholding dharma was the utmost, the supreme duty of the king, and because the king was the guardian of dharma, and the king could never defy dharma, and he was aided by a Mantri Parishad who would guide the king in the conduct of day-to-day administration. Now let us see the provincial administration during the Mauryan time. The entire empire was divided into two parts. The first part was that which was under the direct control of the king, and there were certain vassal states as well. The Mauryan territory that was directly divided into cities, and those cities are also further divided into wards. So that system is still going on today. Now moving on, if we see the local administration, the district administration was in the charge of the Rajukas. Those who were at the helm of the district administration were called the Rajukas, whose position and functions are similar to today's district collectors. So the district collectors that we have, if we trace the evolution of this institution of the district collector, we see that during the Mauryan period, the district administration was under the charge of the Rajukas, and the Rajukas were assisted by Yuktas or subordinate officials. So in the urban areas, there was something like a municipal board with 30 members, and there were 6 committees also with 5 board members in each of those 6 committees to manage the administration of cities. So some similar sort of a system exists today also in our country. So if we see the evolution of municipal administration, we have to go back to the time of Emperor Ashoka and the Maurya period, where we can see that the district administration was under the supervision of the Rajuka, a position similar to today's district collector, who was assisted, the Rajuka was assisted by the Yuktas or subordinate officials. In the urban areas, there was a municipal board also, in which there were 30 members. There were 6 committees with 5 members each in those 6 committees. Now, these are the 6 committees that were there. The first one is the Committee on Industrial Arts. The second committee was the Committee on Foreigners. The third one was the Committee on Registration of Birth and Deaths. The fourth committee being the Committee on Trade and Commerce. And finally, the Committee on Supervision of Manufacturers and the Committee on Collection of Excise and Custom Duties. So these 3 committees were there. These 6 committees, the Committee on Industrial Arts, on Foreigners, on registration of birth and deaths, a committee related to trade and commerce, as well as to the supervision of manufacturers and collection of excise and customs. So the duties of village administration was in the hands of an official called the Gramini, and the superior of that official was called the Gopa, who was in charge of 10 to 15 villages. So village administration was under the Gramini, and the superior of the Gramini was the Gopa, who had about 10 to 15 villages under his supervision. Now let us see the revenue administration. Kautilya, who was the advisor of Chandragupta Maurya, he laid great emphasis on the treasury. According to him, smooth and successful functioning of administration was dependent on treasury. So if the administration had to be run in a smooth and successful manner as well. So these proved to be very important sources of revenue. Now let us see the military administration during the Mauryan time. The king was the supreme commander, as I just told you, and it was a well-organized army during the Mauryan period and under the control of the Senapati. So according to the Greek author Pliny, the Mauryan army consisted of 6 lakh infantry. So there were 6 lakh infantry, 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 elephants, and 8,000 chariots. So here also there was a 30-member board to look into the matters pertaining to war. So there was a 30-member board in municipal administration as well, the municipal board, and here also there was a 30-member board in the military administration to look into matters of war. And these members were placed again in 6 committees with 5 members each. Now these committees that were responsible to manage the following wings of military were the Navy and Transport, Supply Infantry, Cavalry, War Chariots, War Elephants. So these are the things that these committees were responsible to manage. Navy Transport, Supply Infantry, Cavalry, and War Chariots and War Elephants. So each of these above wings were under the control of the Adhyaksh or Superintendent. So there was a Adhyaksh or Superintendent of each of the committees. Now let us move on to the Gupta period. We have discussed administration under the Mauryan period. Now let us move on to the Gupta Empire, another major empire of the ancient era that was there in India. Now let us discuss the central administration that prevailed during the Gupta period. So during the Gupta period, monarchy was the form of government, similar to what it was in the Mauryan period. Monarchy was the form of government during the Gupta period, and the Gupta age has been hailed as a benevolent monarchy. So it was not an absolutist or autocratic monarchy, it was a benevolent monarchy. And the king adopted pompous titles such as Parameshwar, Maharaja Dhiraj, and Parambhatarak. The king was the highest authority and wielded wide powers, similar to the institution of king during the Mauryan period. So these wide powers were wielded by the king to enable smooth functioning of the empire. And again, similar to the Mauryan period, the king enjoyed political, administrative, military, and judicial powers. And the theory of divinity of king was also popular during this period, which further enhanced, which further augmented the royal power and prestige of the king. So in this period, the king were looked upon as gods, and the king possessed extensive powers. However, during the Gupta period, the king did not rule in a tyrannical manner. However, we can call the king as a benevolent monarch. The council of ministers and several other officials were there to assist the king in day-to-day performance of his duties. So this was the institution of the king that was at the apex of the central administration during the Gupta period. Moving on, let us see the provincial administration during the Gupta Empire period. The Guptas organized a system of provincial and local administration as well, just like the Mauryans had done. The empire was divided into certain divisions called bhukt, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of a uparika. So the empire was divided into certain divisions called bhukt, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of an official called uparika. The bhuktis were divided into district or vishaya. So the bhuktis were further divided into district, which were called vishay, and each vishay was under a vishaypati. So each district was under a head of district, similar to what we have in our country, the district collector. So in the Gupta period, it was the vishaypati. The vishaypati were generally members of the royal family, and they were assisted in the work by a council of representatives. So each district, the entire empire was divided into certain divisions called the bhukt, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of a uparika. The bhuktis were further divided into district or vishayas, and each district was placed under a vishaypati, who were generally members of the royal family, and they were assisted in their work by a council of representatives. Now, let us see the local administration during the Gupta period. The city was governed by a parishad, and the head of the parishad was known as the Nagar Rakshak. The Purpal Uparika was another officer, and the Nagar Rakshak worked under the Purpal Uparika. So the Purpal Uparika was above the Nagar Rakshak in the city, in the urban administration, which was governed by a parishad. Also, there was a special official known as the Avasthika, who acted as the superintendent of the Dharmashalas. So the Avasthika was also there, a special official who acted as the superintendent of Dharmashalas. The village was the smallest unit of administration. Here also, during the Gupta Empire period, the village was the smallest unit of administration. The Gramika was the head of the village. There were other officials as well, known as Dutas or messengers. Headman and Kartri were also there. Moving on to the revenue administration during the Gupta period, we see that The duties of revenue administration were carried out by officials like Viniyuktaka, Rajuka, Uparika, and Dashparadhika. So these were certain officials who carried out revenue administration. So from among the 18 sources of revenue, land revenue was the most important source of revenue. So there were 18 sources from where revenue was obtained. However, land revenue was the chief source of revenue. And land revenue was again fixed at 1/6 of the total produce. And also land revalue was an important source of income for the Gupta Empire, and the greater part of the revenue generated was spent on public welfare. So let us see now the judicial administration in the Gupta Empire. The judicial system here was far more developed than the Mauryas. Under the Guptas, the judicial system was far more developed, and there were several books on law that were compiled during the Gupta period. And for the first time, civil and criminal laws were clearly demarcated. So it was during the Gupta period only, for the first time, civil and criminal laws were clearly demarcated, and the judicial system was highly developed. There were several books as well on law that were compiled during this period. Theft and adultery, they came under criminal law, and disputes regarding various types of property came under civil law during the Gupta period. So this was the judicial administration. Let us see the military administration. The Gupta rulers, they had a huge army similar to the Mauryans, and also they maintained a standing army, and the use of cavalry and horse archery were extremely popular at that time. And the territories of the empire were kept under watchful eyes. The military officers who were referred in the inscriptions that we have found regarding the Gupta Empire, the military officers who were there under the Gupta Empire were Senapati, Mahasenapati, Bal Adhikrita, and the Mahabal Adhikrita. Also the Dandanayak, the Sandhi Vigrahika, and the Mahasandhi Vigrahika, they were also there. So these were the key functionaries in the military administration. Also, a lot of trade and business was also there during the Gupta Empire, and India had become, in a way, a hub for global trade and global commerce during the Gupta period. So the empire, the Gupta Empire, it carried out trade activities with countries like China, Ceylon, or today's Sri Lanka, and also with several European countries as well as the East Indian islands. So this made the empire become economically and strategically strong. So this enabled the empire to annex new states as well, and therefore expand the territory of the empire. So this was the Gupta period and administration under the Gupta period. So we are pretty much done with the ancient administrative system, and we've studied the Mauryans and the Gupta period. Let us move on now to the medieval administrative system. Here we're going to study the Mughals. So medieval India from 13th to 16th is known as the late medieval period. The Mughal Empire, established in 1526 AD, is often referred to as it marks the end of the late medieval era and the beginning of the early medieval era. So we are going to study the administrative system during the Mughal period. So the period from 8th to 12th century in political life of India was dominated by the presence of a large number of states. So there was a lot of fragmentation that had taken place. Political, territorial fragmentation during the 8th. So there was no one centralized strong empire after the Gupta Empire's decline. So from the 8th to 12th century in in India, the political life was dominated by a large number of states. The bigger ones, they tried to establish their supremacy in North India as well as in the Deccan region. The main contenders in this struggle were the Pratiharas, the Palas, and the Rashtrakutas. In South India, we see that the most powerful kingdoms to emerge during this period was the Cholas. The Cholas, they brought about a political unification in large parts of the country. However, the picture in North India was one of political fragmentation. So after the Guptas and after Harshvardhan, there was political fragmentation in North India. And it was in this period that India's contact with the new religion of Islam began. And the contacts began in the 7th century through Arab traders. Afterwards, there were many invasions also, and the Delhi Sultans, they were there. And finally, in 1526, after the first battle of Panipat, the Mughals, they came to rule India. So let us see the Mughal administrative system. Let us first discuss their central administration. So here also monarchy was the institution of government under the Mughals. The king had a number of ministers to assist and advise him and to help him discharge his functions. The four most important ministers were first the Diwan, who was in charge of revenue and finance. The second one was the Mir Bakshi, who was the head of the military department. The third one being the Mir Saman, who was in charge of factories and stores. And also there was the Sadar as well, who was the head of the ecclesiastical and judicial departments. So these four were the most important officials under the Mughal king to assist the king. So here also we see that there was a centralized monarchical system, and the king was assisted by a number of officials and ministers. The four most important were the Diwan, in charge of revenue and finance, Mir Bakshi, the head of the military department, Mir Saman, in charge of factories and stores, and finally the Sadar, who was in charge of the judicial and ecclesiastical departments. Moving on, let us first discuss the function of the Diwan. And although there were a council of ministers to assist the Mughal rulers, there was a Diwan who would assist the Sultan in the administration of the country. As I just said, the Diwan, he held the revenue department, which was very important, and represented the king at ceremonial occasions. So the Diwan was assisted by Diwan-e-Tan and Diwan-e-Khalsan. So according to Abul Fazl and his monumental work, Ain-e-Akbari, the Diwan looked after the royal treasury and also supervised income and expenditure of the empire. So the post of Diwan was very important, and because the entire revenue system of the empire was under the control of the Diwan. And it was the Diwan who fixed the revenue of newly acquired territories also, and decided when to grant subsidies or not during times of scarcity. So the institution of Diwan was a very important one during the Mughal period. Moving on, the second most important institution at the central level was that of the Mir Bakshi. Now the Mir Bakshi was the commander of the entire military, which was under the king. And the Mir Bakshi was also the chief advisor to the king on military matters. And because the Mughal Empire was engaged in a lot of wars and territorial conquests, so the position of Mir Bakshi became all the more important. And also the records pertaining to the Mansabdars were kept by the Mir Bakshi only. So not only the head of the military administration, the Mir Bakshi also kept records of the Mansabdar as well, and gave military on military policy. The Mir Bakshi was the chief advisor to the king. So some of the functions of the Mir Bakshi were recruitment to the army, maintenance of troops in good form, conduct of military warfare tests, inspecting horses, maintenance of muster rolls of troops, as well as equipping the troops for battle. So these were some of the main functions of the Mir Bakshi. Now, after Mir Bakshi, we see the Mir Saman, the third important official at the central level. The Mir Saman looked after the maintenance of the royal buildings, the roads, the karkhanas or workshops, and the parks. The Mir Saman was also responsible for provision of the stores of military as well as the household supply. So it was the Mir Saman only who purchased all the goods on behalf of the state and was also responsible for trade and commercial activities. Finally, we see the fourth most important official, that is the Sadr. The Sadr was the Chief Justice and also in charge of ecclesiastical or religious affairs. And the Sadr looked after two departments, one of justice and the other of religion. In performing the judicial functions, the Sadr acted more as a Qazi. So, in performing the judicial function, the Sadr acted as a Qazi. He looked after the judicial and the religious departments. So, these were the four officials: Diwan, Mir Bakshi, Mir Saman, and Sadr. The four most important officials who advised the king, the Mughal king. We are talking about. We are discussing the medieval administrative system, and as part of that, we are discussing the Mughal Empire. Because in the medieval period, the Mughal Empire was one of the only empires which had a sort of centralization. Before the Mughal Empire, we see that there was a lot of political fragmentation. So that is why we are focusing on the Mughal Empire. There was another official called the Muhtasib. Now, the office of the Muhtasib, it combined duties of both secular as well as religious in nature. As regards to the religious duty of the Muhtasib, he ensured that the principles of Islam were protected and all tenets of faith were religiously carried out. The moral principles were also advocated to the public by the Muhtasib. Now let us move on to the provincial administration. The following officials were in charge of different areas in the provincial administration. The Subedar, there was a Subedar of each province. Each province was under a Subedar, who was also known as the governor. And during the time of Akbar, the designation Sipa Salar was also used for Subedar. The Subedar was a sort of a mini king within his own province. So in the province of which the Subedar was the governor, he was like a mini king and was responsible for the maintenance of law and order, controlling the local army, realization of state dues, and provision of justice. So all the functions that the king did at the central level, the Subedar did at the state level. So sort of now that we have the prime minister at the union level and the chief minister at the state level, something similar to that. So the king was at the central level during the Mughal period, and the Subedar performed those same functions at the state level. However, the Subedar had to report to the king, and the king could change the Subedar whenever he wanted. So that is why the Subedar was very important for provincial administration and was also referred to as the mini king. The second official at the provincial administration was again the Diwan. The Diwan was appointed by the Sultan, not by the Subedar, and he assisted the Subedar in running the administration of the province. And during the initial Mughal period, this office was also considered parallel to that of the Subedar only. However, the Diwan did not enjoy equal rights like the Subedar. So here at the state level also there was a Sadr. Just like there was a Sadr at the central level, there was a Sadr at the state level also. He was appointed by the king and was completely free from all interventions of the Diwan or the Subedar in performance of his work. So we see some sort of a separation of executive and judiciary that was there in this period also. It is enshrined in Article 50 of our Constitution, that is a part of the directive principles of state policy, that there shall be a separation between executive and judiciary in the services of the state. Something similar to that was there during the Mughal period, as the Sadr at the provincial level was free from intervention by the Diwan or the Subedar. and was appointed directly by the king. So here we see in today's India, members of the judiciary, the judges, they are appointed by the president and they are free from executive intervention. So something similar existed back then as well. The Sadr was generally a scholar and religious person. Now another official at the provincial level was the Amil. The Amil was a very important official because he was the revenue collection officer. And there were certain other duties also that he performed. He looked after agricultural land and he helped the farmers to convert the barren land into cultivable land. So that is why the Amil, also known as the Amil Guzar, was a very important official, and because he was the revenue collection officer, and also he looked after agricultural land and helped the farmers to convert barren land into cultivable land. The fifth official at the provincial level was the Bakshi. The office of the Bakshi was identical to that of the Amil. The Bakshi supervised the work of the Kanungos, or who are also known as the Patwaris, and he kept a record of various contracts entered into by the monarchy. There was another official called the Potdar. The Potdar was mainly concerned with the collection of revenue from peasants and deposit the same in the royal treasury. So he was also connected to revenue administration at the provincial level. So the Potdar was authorized to issue necessary receipt for the revenue collected, and also he could keep a full record of the same. So another important official at the provincial level was in charge of the provincial army, and he also assisted the Subedar of the province in administration of provinces, and was similar to the Mir Bakshi in central level during the Mughal period. The Fauzdar was responsible for the maintenance of law and order within the province and took necessary steps to suppress revolts. And there was another important official at the provincial level called the Kotwal, who was a police official and performed certain judicial functions as well. The Kotwal was responsible for the preservation of law and order within the province. There's another official called the Waki Navis. The Waki Navis was responsible for communicating information pertaining to the provinces to the king. So the Waki Navis's action, his function was to communicate information pertaining to the provinces to the king. There was also a district administrative apparatus as well during the Mughal period. The Fauzdar was the administrative head of the district as well, who performed the same duties as was performed by the Subedar at the provincial level. So at the district level, there was a Fauzdar, and the functions of the Fauzdar was the same as that of the Subedar at the provincial level. Some of his main duties were maintenance of law and order and controlling the revolts of the local feudal lords, that is the zamindars. So these were some of the duties of the Fauzdar. And also at the district level, there was a Kotwal as well, who was responsible for maintenance of law and order and was also the judicial head of the district. So the Kotwal, he heard criminal cases also and took actions against those who were involved in the activities like hoarding of food grain or using faulty weights and measures. So this was at the district level. So there was a provincial level Kotwal and there was a district level Kotwal. Just like we have in the district the superintendents of police, the SPs, and at the state level we have the DGP, the Director General of Police. In modern India, in our today's administrative apparatus, we have these institutions. However, during the Mughal period, there was a provincial level Kotwal and there was a district level Kotwal who did the same functions as the provincial level Kotwal did. at the district level. Now let us see the revenue administration under the Mughal period. So there were three types of land tenure systems that were there under the Mughal period. The first was the zamindari system that was prevalent in Bengal, which had also been extended to some parts of Madras also by the Britishers. Madras is today's Tamil Nadu and also parts of Andhra Pradesh as well. So the first type of land tenure system was the zamindari system, prevalent in Bengal and some parts of that was later on extended to some parts of Madras by the Britishers. So the zamindars acted as intermediaries between the empire and the farmers. During the Mughal period, the zamindars, they were intermediaries between the emperor and the farmer in settlement of land revenue. The second system was the Malwadi system that was there in the northwest provinces, where the settlement of land revenue was done jointly by zamindars and farmers, because here they both had joint proprietorship of the land, the zamindar and farmers. The Yotwari system was also there in North India and in Deccan. It did away with all kinds of intermediaries between state and ryots or peasants. Though the farmers were responsible for the annual payment of revenue, they did not have any proprietary rights. All the proprietary rights during the Mughal period was vested in the king. So the farmers, they had to just cultivate the land and pay the revenue. However, they did not own the land. They did not have proprietary rights over the land. During the Mughal period, all the proprietary rights were under the king. Now, if we see the administration of civil justice, the Mughal Empire, it was a Muslim state, an Islamic state, and the administration of civil justice was based entirely on the precepts of the Quran. And the Qazi or the judges, they followed the Quran precepts in dispensing justice. They were also guided by earlier judgments as well as by ordinances that were issued by the emperors in this regard. So there were ordinances that were also issued in present day in our constitution also. There's the concept of ordinance in Article 123. It is enshrined. So in those days also, the judges, because the Islam was the state religion of the Mughal Empire, the administration of civil justice was based entirely on the precepts of Quran. And the judges also, they followed the Quran precepts only while dispensing justice. They also referred to earlier judgments as well as the ordinances that were issued by the emperors, the Mughal emperor. Now, in criminal justice, similar to civil justice, the administration of criminal justice was also based on the precepts of Quran. The criminal cases were classified under three main heads. So the first head was crimes against God. The second one was crimes against the sovereign, and the third one was crimes against the subjects. So huda or retaliation and tazir or punishment inflicted by the judge were meted out to the offenders. So two types of punishments: either it was huda or retaliation, and tazir, that was punishment inflicted by the judge. So these two types of punishments were meted out to the offenders as a part of the administration of criminal justice. So we have so far studied the two administrative systems. Ancient administrative system, that is under the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire. We have studied the ancient administrative system, in which we studied the Mauryan Empire, how the Mauryan Empire had the administrative apparatus. The central administration, we discussed about their army, the duties of the king. The provincial administration, we discussed. The local administration, the committees that were to assist the local administration. We discussed revenue administration and military administration as well. during the Mauryan period, and the same things we discussed during the Gupta Empire also. Administration of civil and criminal justice. So now let me introduce a little bit. We'll do this in the next class, but let me give you a brief introduction of the British administrative system. We have done ancient and medieval administrative system. The next unit that we're going to do is the British administrative system. So let me introduce that first. The Britishers, they arrived in India first as traders under the banner of a trading corporation, that is the East India Company. The British Crown granted a group of merchants a monopoly over trade in the eastern waters in 1600 AD, when the East India Company was formed, and which eventually led to the establishment of the East India Company. This charter that was granted to the East India Company, giving them monopoly of trade by the British Crown in 1600 AD. The company arrived in India as a trading corporation, and till 1765 it remained a trading corporation. After the decline of the Mughal Empire, the trading company started gaining territorial grounds and powers to rule over India. Thereby, the company renamed itself as the East India Company. The East India Company, it created a vast administrative machinery in our country. It also set up a well-organized personnel system through which control over territorial provinces in India could become more and more consolidated. So after its territorial conquests, the East India Company, so the first major conquest of the East India Company, the first major victory was its victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, where it defeated the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla. Although they had set up their first factory in Surat, and also in Madras, also they had created in in Calcutta, they made the Fort William. However, they did not have any political power until 1757, where they, for the first time, defeated an Indian ruler, that is Siraj-ud-Dawla, in the Battle of Plassey. And after that, again in 1761, another watershed movement came when they defeated the combined forces of the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, the Emperor of the King of Awadh, Shuja-ud-Dawla, as well as the King of Bengal, Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim. So the British East India Company defeated the combined forces of these three in the Battle of Buxar in 1761. So after these two battles, the company, it gained a lot of political power as well, became politically prominent in India, and India at that time was politically fragmented. And also the defeat of the Marathas in the third battle of Panipat, that also gave a fillip to the company's aspirations in India. And over time, the East India Company became the most powerful institution in India. So afterwards, the East India Company created a vast administrative machinery. They set up well-organized personnel systems throughout the country, and through which they controlled vast territorial provinces, and they became more consolidated also. And Lord Cornwallis, he developed a civil services code, and Lord Cornwallis only regularized and specified the office of district collector and the office of district judge. So we are going to further study the administrative apparatus under the East India Company as well as the Britishers in the next classes. We are going to do all the acts that they brought. So in today's class, we have discussed medieval and ancient administrative system, and in the next class, we are going to discuss the British administrative system. So that's it for today. Thank you so much.